Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to do an IEM shootout. We're going to cover a number of IEMs that are under $250. Now, the reason why I'm targeting this price point is because if you can spend a little bit more than $250, you can get yourself into the Moondrop Blessing 2 territory. Let me just open this up and show you guys what it looks like. I've actually already reviewed this IEM, but in my opinion, if you can afford the Blessing 2, buy it, right? This is a little bit more expensive. I think it comes in at around $320. It's been on sale for a little bit less than that. But if you can afford, $275, save a little bit more and get this. While the fit may not be for everybody, this is definitely a game changer in the IEM landscape for IEMs under, $500, $600. But for anyone where the Blessing 2 might be a little bit too steep, or maybe the fit isn't all that good for you because it does have a thicker nozzle, there are a number of IEMs to choose from below that, and I'm going to cover some in this video. Obviously, there are a lot more than the ones I'm going to cover here, but realistically, I have like a ton of IEMs to review, and I figured this is just a quick way to kind of go over them. And so while this is a comparison, this is also going to be sort of my, quick takes on a number of different IEMs. So in this video, I'm mainly going to be covering the Theaudio Nm2 Plus, the Moondrop KXXX / KXXS, depending on where you get it from, and the Theaudio Legacy 5. As a disclaimer, the Nm2 Plus and the KXXX were sent to me by Shenzhen Audio, and the Theaudio Legacy 5 was sent to me by Lin Sol. I've left links in the description, but I've not been paid any way to say anything in particular about it, and these are not affiliate links. This is just where you can go to find more information on the product. Now, again, there are a number of other IEMs that are, in this price range, and it's a very competitive price range. Just these are the ones that I happen to be reviewing today. And just before we get going, I know that somebody will have seen the title of this video and immediately start typing in the comments, what about Etymotic? What about the ER2 series? My problem with the Etymotic stuff is that while they do sound good, the fit has always been a little bit violating. And I just find that any situation where I want to use IEMs, that style of fit is a barrier to entry, and I think it is for a lot of people as well. But just so you guys know, yes, I do recommend Etymotic stuff if you can handle the fit, absolutely. So let me begin with the Theaudio Nm2 Plus. Now, the Theaudio Nm2 Plus is an IEM that comes in right at around $170. This is a dynamic driver in here. They call it a double cavity dynamic driver that's going on, which is quite interesting. As far as the non-sound related stuff goes, it's very lightweight, surprisingly lightweight. It feels sturdy. It feels like it's not going to break or anything like that. I don't feel at all like I need to worry about throwing it into a backpack, but it does also come with this little carry pouch here. So definitely good on that front. It's reasonably comfortable. The cable is also lightweight, and I actually really do like this cable. It doesn't get in the way, and it's not particularly microphonic or anything like that either. For the connector style, you do get a 2-pin connector here, as is pretty common these days with a number of IEMs. As far as sound quality goes, this is a very strange tuning. This has quite a bit of presence there in the lower mids, not in a bad way, and actually the bass is good on this. It's punchy and impactful, and it sounds really engaging, and there's quite good detail there in the lower mids as well. But then in the upper mids, it's quite shrill and shouty, quite aggressive there around 2K, 3K. And then for the treble, it's just not balanced for where the upper mids are, leading to a somewhat compressed and congested kind of sound. So to describe this a little bit better, the fundamental tone here is emphasized for many of the instrument tones or vocals and things like that over their resonant harmonics that occur above that in the treble frequencies, and this just leads to a somewhat unbalanced kind of sound. Now, the interesting thing with this kind of tuning is that apparently this is a kind of tuning that is appealing to certain audiences and in certain regions of the world, I think depending on the genres of music that they listen to, because it does have the effect of pronouncing certain types of vocals over the rest of the mix. Now, in my mind, it doesn't work at all for my kind of preference. And I've seen this kind of tuning before, and I've been told that it's been for a specific region. And this is quite interesting because there is also research out that suggests that it doesn't actually matter what the region is, that people's preferences weren't dependent on culture or background or region or anything like that. We actually did a live stream on this channel on that very subject, having gone through the research on this, and the bottom line for that is that it wasn't particularly conclusive. I wasn't particularly satisfied with the research that was done, but it did show that people from a number of different backgrounds and cultures had the same preference. But regardless, it's not something that's conclusive, especially because these are tuned this way intentionally. So this may do well in regions where people are listening to certain genres of music that benefit from a pronounced kind of vocal presence. As far as the technical performance goes here, it's appropriate for the price, I think. But nothing all that special. It's a little bit better for soundstage than the Moondrop dynamic driver IEMs, but at the same time, the technical performance here doesn't make up for the strangeness of the tuning. So while it does some things good, overall, this is not something that I'm going to recommend over other IEMs like the Moondrop Starfield or the KXXS or KXXX. Now, speaking of which, let's move on to the KXXX, which is the one that I have here. This is the KXXX. This is the drop version of the KXXS. And as we can see, the whole thing is black, right, to coincide with the rest of Drop's aesthetic. For me, I love the way that this looks. I think this looks amazing. Matte black and black everything. The cable is interesting because it's lightweight, but it's this sort of braided cloth kind of fabric material. I don't mind it at all, but I can see this being maybe a little bit annoying for somebody if it starts to get tangled, because it does keep its shape a little bit. This uses the 2-pin style connector for the cable, once again, and it is very comfortable. Both the Starfield and the KXXX, Moondrop's design with this style here for their dynamic driver IEMs, they're very, very comfortable. Additionally, the KXXX comes in this little pouch here, which is small and compact, easy to throw into a backpack. Now, as I mentioned, this is the drop version. It's the same as the KXXS, apparently. And it's interesting because the tuning for this is identical to that of the Moondrop Starfield. And I don't just mean similar, I mean identical. To the point where initially I thought maybe they just painted the Starfield black, because supposedly the stuff that we might think of as detail is also available in frequency response, and they measure identically. Yet, I do hear a little bit of a difference between this and the Starfield, and I've been comparing them side by side, and this, I may do a future video on this comparison because this is really interesting to me. Supposedly, the only real difference between the KXXS and the Starfield is that they use a different coating for the diaphragm. So the Starfield uses the carbon nanotube coating, and the KXXS uses diamond-like carbon for the driver. But for anyone who's unaware, they're both using dynamic drivers. Now, as far as the technical performance is concerned, in short, when it comes to budget or entry-level IEMs, this has some of the best bass response, period. Like the bass impact and physicality is just fantastic. And also the tuning for this is pretty good. It's really good, actually. For anyone unaware, Moondrop tends to go for a Harman-like tuning, and it's pretty close to that as well, meaning that you get a little bit of an emphasis there, around 2-3K in the upper mids, for the ear gain, and it's a little bit emphasized over, the resonant harmonics there as well, but nowhere near like what's going on with the Nm2 Plus. So this isn't that, kind of shouty presentation that you get with that. This is a more smooth and more normal sounding IEM, but for certain instruments I find that it can be a little bit intense there, a little hot there. Like electric guitars can be a little bit too forward there for my liking, but that's just my personal taste. In general, the overall balance is quite good. This is mostly neutral with a bit of a bass emphasis, and the treble I find is a little bit disjointed and uneven there. You hear the cymbal hits crash through with a lot of splash and sizzle there, but at the same time, when there's a lot of busy passages with lots of tambourines or different percussive instruments going on, that doesn't come across quite as cleanly on this as it does on something with a little bit more treble presence there, or a little bit more balanced of a treble presence there, somewhere between 8 and 10K. So I definitely do recommend this, but I also think that the Starfield is the better value because you get the identical tuning to this IEM, and it's just maybe a little step back there as far as the treble detail. I found that with the Starfield, that was its only real weakness as far as technical performance goes, and of course for both of them the soundstage is really weird. Like there's almost no center image. It's got left, right, and then in your head for both of them. So if you're looking for soundstage, neither the Starfield nor the KXXS are going to be to your liking. Now moving on to the $250 price mark with the Theaudio Legacy 5. This is a hybrid driver IEM using 4 balanced armature drivers for the mids and highs, and then a dynamic driver in the bass. Beginning with the non-sound related stuff, these are reasonably comfortable with an acrylic shell design, but they're a little bit on the large side when you compare them to the other IEMs that I just mentioned. But personally, I find that this style is really comfortable for me. Even with their other higher end IEMs like the Clairvoyance and the Monarch, which I will be comparing soon, I find this shell design to be really quite comfortable, and it works for me. It's smooth, there's no jagged edges, and I also like the acrylic design because it doesn't feel like anything's going to chip off, or if I just put this down on a table or put it into a backpack, it doesn't feel like anything's going to, crack or break. That, I think, is the only real downside with the KXXS and the Starfield. There's reports of the coating, the paint there chipping on them, and I don't think it's going to happen with this. Now, for the cable, yeah, it's a little bit on the thick side. It's a little bit on the heavy side as well. There's nothing wrong with it as far as usability, and it's functional. It's not microphonic, but yeah, it's definitely a little bit on the thick side when you compare it to other IEMs, like the other ones that I've just mentioned. And just like with the other ones, this does use the 2-pin style connector here. Just one interesting thing to note with the cable here is that this cable is actually a 2.5 millimeter balanced cable, and then they give you this 3.5 millimeter adapter in the box, which is, yeah, it's a little bit large and bulky when you're just walking around with your portable device. So if you're just plugging this into a phone with a dongle, that might be a little bit large and cumbersome. But if you have a DAP that has a balanced output, this is totally fine. So for example, I'll often use the DX220, which is behind me on the shelf, and I just plug it into that, or I'll use this Radson ES100 is a 2.5 millimeter balanced output there. Not that for IEMs you would ever need the benefits of balanced, but sometimes the outputs are different, so that's just worth keeping in mind. Now, how does the Legacy 5 sound? Well, in a word, warm, but not in a bad way. Warm yet coherent is how I would describe this. Keep in mind that this is a hybrid design, so we got balanced armatures for the mids and treble, and we got a dynamic driver in the bass. This means that the bass is punchy. You do get good dynamics there for that, physicality and the impact there. But at the same time, because of the tuning here, the bass isn't as distinct. But really, I find this to be somewhat tastefully done here. It's definitely got too much lower mid-range presence for my taste. But for anybody who wants extra body and tone for the lower mid-range, for where those fundamental tones are, which I know a lot of people do, you're going to like this kind of tuning. And it does work. I just find that some of its technical aspects don't shine through as clearly as they would if that lower mid-range emphasis wasn't as strong. And there's enough treble energy and sparkle that the relationship between fundamental and resonant harmonic for the rest of the frequency response is intact. So again, when you hear a piano tone, yeah, it emphasizes the lower section of that tone, but it doesn't, completely sound compressed or anything as a result. Now, as far as technical performance compared to the other two, the question is it worth going up from the KXXS to this? And my answer is actually yes, it is, because where the KXXS, struggles when it comes to soundstage and the center image definition, the Legacy 5 is totally fine. For detail retrieval, again, it's a little bit hampered by the tuning being a little bit forward there in the lower mids and the upper bass, which does crowd out some of the clarity that would otherwise be there, with this configuration. But at $250, I do think this is appropriate, and again, I do think this is worth the price increase over the other two on this list. Now, I have one more IEM for you guys, and the reason why this is a bonus IEM is because it is a little bit more expensive, and it is in the price range where I would recommend the Blessing 2 over it. However, there's a reason why you might look into this IEM rather than the Blessing 2, and it has to do with comfort and form factor. Let's take a look at the DUNU DK2001. Now, this is the DUNU DK2001. The cable is actually from the final A8000. The cable that comes with this is actually with the DK3001 right now. I just don't happen to have it in the box. But it does use the MMCX connectors, so you can use whatever cable you want. And the one that it does come with is actually quite good. Now, as I mentioned, the DUNU DK2001 is a little bit more expensive. This comes in at around $300, and it's using a hybrid configuration with 3 balanced armatures and 1 dynamic driver to handle bass frequencies. And as I mentioned, the reason to get this, in my opinion, is because this is one of the most comfortable IEMs, period. This whole series, actually, with this design, the DK2001 and the DK3001 Pro, they may not be as good, for their sound quality as the Blessing 2, but the comfort here is much better, and it's much more convenient to use, because remember that the Blessing 2 has a bit of a thicker nozzle there. Now, for the DK2001, obviously the comfort is great, the form factor is great, these are very small, and for its sound quality, this one in particular is the one that I would put squarely in the fun category. It's definitely bass emphasized, especially in the upper bass. It's got a little bit of lower mid-range emphasis there, but but then it does have some weirdness there in the upper mids and in the treble. But the whole thing overall is actually reasonably balanced. It's not as good as the DK3001 Pro, which is just a little bit more expensive, and it's also not as good sounding as the Blessing 2. But for anybody who struggles with the fit of the Blessing 2, I do think this is a good alternative for anybody wanting more bass and a little bit more of a fun kind of sound. In my opinion, the biggest things to nitpick with this IEM for its sonic characteristics are that it's a little bit hot there around 2.5K, and then it's a little bit uneven there in the rest of the upper mids. But for the rest of the balance, it's actually pretty good. Definitely better than the Nm2 Plus. In some aspects, I do prefer this over the Legacy 5 because while it is bass elevated, this doesn't have that same kind of muffled character to the lower mids that the Legacy 5 does, because there's a little bit more distance there between the lower mids and upper bass and the treble, so it's a little bit more balanced there. It's not as warm for the overall balance, but it's definitely still something that I'd consider more in the fun category than the reference kind of sound category. So we might say this is kind of like a V-shaped kind of sound rather than a warm sound, and this means that it's still got a little bit of clarity there for the rest of the tonal balance there in the upper mids and treble. So it's just a little bit withdrawn there in the mids, somewhere around 800 to 1K. Still, if I'm looking for a fun sounding IEM that has a really good fit to it, this is on that list. I would still personally take the Blessing 2 because I don't have as many fit issues with that, but I can absolutely see why somebody would take this over the Blessing 2 if your priority is more bass for starters, but then also fit and comfort. I actually found you can sleep with these in. That's that comfortable. And for anybody who's wondering about the Blessing 2 against the new Blessing 2 Dusk, I will be doing a comparison of that soon, so stay tuned for that video. But for the rest of these IEMs, I think they're a little bit hit and miss. The KXXX, while it's a good IEM, I don't know if it's quite worth a price increase over the Starfield, even though I like it better. Same thing with the Legacy 5. As much as I like the Legacy 5, and I do think it is good value, it's also far enough away from the KXXS that suddenly we're into the territory where we might want to also be considering the Blessing 2, in which case, yeah, the Blessing 2 is just categorically better in my opinion, and it's worth saving up from the Legacy 5 to the Blessing 2. But under that, in the sub $250 price range, that sweet spot in my opinion is the $180 $190 KXXS, and honestly the Starfield is still competitive within that range as well, because it has the same tuning, just with a different coating for the diaphragm. The Starfield is probably all you need in that whole price range, even though there is a bit of an upward trajectory there as far as price to performance goes. You have these different price tiers where suddenly when you get into a certain bracket, it makes a little bit more sense to just save up a little bit more and get the next thing because it's so much better than everything else, right? And so yeah, for that sub $250 bracket, I do think the KXXS is probably the one that fits that sweet spot the closest for me, even though yes, I do like the Legacy 5 as well. Anyways, that does it for this video. Stay tuned for future comparisons. I will be doing a comparison between the Theaudio Monarch and the Clairvoyance soon. I have both of them in-house. They're both here and they are both amazing, but you guys will have to wait and see which one I prefer on that one. I also have a review of the Dunu SA6 coming up, which is also a very exciting IEM, and then I have a comparison between the Blessing 2 and the Blessing 2 Dusk coming up as well. But in any case, thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.